Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our middle grade YA panel here at RoberCon. It's 10 o'clock. It's kind of cloudy here in Binghamton, but I hope we're going to have a really good discussion this morning. So let's, first of all, what our purpose today is for the next 45 minutes is to discuss, you know, the middle grade, the young adult audience that's out there, but also the type of fiction that's out there for that audience. And I really encourage you all to ask questions as our panelists answer questions or you know, put out their thoughts and opinions. Please use the chat window for questions. And we're going to pause at least 2 or 3 times to look to see what questions you have. So please, we really appreciate anything that you want to ask. I don't think any question is a bad question, so please put it down there. So I want to introduce or have everybody introduce themselves. My name's Paul Smith. I live right here in Endwell, which is about 20 minutes away from the Roberson Museum. I am a self-published, I'd say MGYA author. I just finished a series in March called the Jason and the Draconaut series. It's 5 books. And starting plans to work on a new series. So let's start with Kathy. We'll go to you next.
Okay. I'm Kathy Sullivan. I write YA and middle grade science fiction and fantasy. A little bit of promotion, middle grade portal fantasy, short story collection, more YA, and been writing for back when I was YA age myself.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. And SN?
All right, my name is Shireen. I write as S and Arly. I am also an indie publisher, indie writer. And I have 2 short story collections and 2 novellas out. And I write primarily young adult fantasy. I do dabble a little bit in horror or dark fiction and occasionally stray into science fiction. And I have, like Kathy, been writing since I was a kid. And I read a lot of young adult, partly because I enjoy it and partly because that's the genre I write in.
Awesome. And do I call you Jay, JR?
Yeah, and Jay is by far
Jay, awesome. Okay, go ahead, Jay.
So yeah, I'm J.R.H. Lawless. Definitely call me Jay. I'm a science fiction author I'm Canadian and French dual national, currently coming to you from the foggy coast of Atlantic Canada. And so I'm a debut novelist this year. These are my 2 science fiction novels. It's science fiction, quite dark humor, Always Greener, and The Rude Eye Rebellion, which is the sequel, which just came out last week, in fact. So 2 novels, debut novelist in 2020, which is obviously brilliant timing. I am also, these are adult, but I'm also a middle grade author, and currently I have a manuscript with my agent who's preparing that to go on submissions with my first middle grade novel.
Awesome.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So great. Thank you all for joining us. So let me just jump right in here. So I'm going to ask kind of 2 questions at once to start, and feel free to answer both or either one, however you want to do that. So if we were to define middle grade or YA fiction, how would we do that? Or what are the biggest differences between middle grade YA fiction and regular sci-fi fantasy? So we can kind of popcorn around. Whoever wants to start.
I think there are a couple of different definitions that you can use for middle grade and YA. One is the publishing definition, which, you know, publishers have created the genres. They're sort of artificial boxes that we put fiction or books actually into so that people can find things that appeal to them. It makes it easier to sell them. And then there's the, you know, less of the publisher, more of the writer and reader perspective. And from a writer and reader perspective, it's, you know, something that'll appeal to a middle grade reader or a young adult reader. The publishers tend to have, you know, more specific restrictions, like the protagonist should be a middle grade aged person or a young adult aged person, and they should have the agency to solve a problem, and that kind of thing.
Cool. Nice. Bless you. Anybody else?
Basically, on along the panels I've been on, usually middle grade is what the publisher definition of middle grade is 8 to 13 or 8 to 12. YA is 12 to 18. And it's changed over the years because, I mean, when I first started writing, you had adult and you had kids. There was no YA. And then they suddenly started phasing that in. And then they threw in the middle grade, which I thought I was writing YA. Oh, actually, I'm writing middle grade now. Okay, whatever. And middle grade is supposed to be a little more hopeful and dwelling on the family and friends, whereas YA is more focusing on society. That's what they say. I haven't noticed that much when I'm reading it.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, and that is interesting because I think more and more as well, even though obviously the simple definition is in a bookshop, what shelf is it on? And that's it. It's exactly what everything is just, everything you just said is correct. But I think that in terms of content, in terms of tone, that's something I feel which is shifting because you see a lot more, I think, middle grade, which in terms of content, in terms of diversity, inclusion, in terms of representation, in terms of societal questions, environmental questions.
Uh-oh.
You froze.
Jay, you locked up on us, just to let you know.
You folks fine?
Yep, we got you now.
I'm sorry about that. It should
Oh,
be
it's
okay.
all right.
I was just saying that basically you see a lot of middle grade in terms of diversity, inclusion, environmental questions, society questions, STEM-related ones as well, which are massively taking on these questions, which perhaps they might not have done so much back when it was a new commercial category.
Interesting. Interesting. You know, one of the points that when you brought up was that there seems to be a lot of older genre fiction that's kind of coming back, but it's now under YA imprints. And just, have you seen that, or why is that working, that sort of thing?
I've seen it, and sometimes I'm like, I'm not really sure that fits in the YA. The first time I saw The Dragon Riders of Pern in the YA section at Barnes & Noble, I was like, and I read it when I was a teen. I read it in 7th grade, but there wasn't really a YA section in my library as a kid. So I went straight from kids' books to adult books. And then I found science fiction and fantasy and went, oh, well, this is what I want. My kids are reading it, but it doesn't fit a lot of the things that people expect out of YA. Tends to be a little bit more graphic in some ways than a lot of, what's allowed to be written and published as YA now. So some of it works, some of it doesn't. I haven't read Wheel of Time, but I know that was cut up and repackaged as a YA book, and so I'm not sure how well that one worked. But I know that a lot of old sci-fi, golden age sci-fi, has been repackaged as YA, and some of that works because it's shorter, and so it's the length that people expect for YA.
Interesting.
The pre-Harry Potter books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that in particular.
Because I was told when my book first came out, my first book came out, that it was too long for YA. It had to be fantasy. And then Harry Potter book 5 came out. It's like, no, there's no limitation anymore. And the thing I've noticed a lot is with the older stuff, because I mean, Jane Eyre was classified as YA because, it's coming of age. Well, I've talked to the librarians now, and they're going, no, coming of age books are now put in adult. So
Really?
the 10,000 Doors of January is no longer considered YA, which is what I thought when I was first reading it. Like, no, it's basically adult books now. They're shifting categories on us.
Yes, it's a moving target as society changes and what's acceptable for, or what's largely viewed as acceptable for kids and teens to read changes. Those categories change, and we've got the newish category of new adult, which is kind of like YA, only you're 20 somethings.
Huh.
Yeah,
So-
that's exactly what I was going to say as well with regards to new adults, that coming of age would have fit into that sort of budding category, which I feel was, and I'm going to talk in the past tense, new adults, maybe about, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and which seems, the industry seems to be moving away from it. I don't think it has taken as well as YA or MG, obviously. So, so that's probably why coming of age is considered adult, because it would have been considered new adult, and new adult is kind of considered to have, even though I disagree, but not to have taken as well, so it's adult.
I'm thinking bookstores didn't want to add another category of shelving.
How do we keep all these books organized? We keep having to move them. This is on this shelf. Now it's over there.
That's
And
and
you can't put it both in YA and adult. Wait.
No,
Yeah.
no, then you have to have too many copies. Garth Nix goes on this shelf. No, wait. Next week he goes on that shelf.
that's
Wait, we changed our mind. He's over there now.
Just give him a display.
what was one of the points somebody made really segues into my next question is, do we feel that the either the YA middle grade fiction has changed, or really has the audience changed in recent decades? So you're all doing this.
The audience hasn't changed. It's just that we're finally getting some more representative books.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot more representation coming out, which is marvelous. Instead of having the same old, we're getting
Mhm.
new cultures, mythologies. We're getting new looks at maybe old tropes, and it's just love it.
Say one change maybe in terms of the market is that obviously it's not children or even middle grade or even young adults who are necessarily buying the books directly. It's often the parents who are buying the books, and just because that's how it works. And a lot of the parents today are, that's probably the biggest change, science fiction fantasy readers who themselves have been reading for years, and who maybe didn't have themselves parents who read science fiction and fantasy. I mean, maybe I'm just talking for myself here, but I know there's been a definite change, I think, and I can see what not only is there so much more available for my own children, and that's fantastic. It's also, I read as well. Whatever books they get, I read them too, because they're just amazingly well crafted and excellent stories. But so there's also that market as well, with more parents willing to buy and not writing off science fiction fantasy as some frivolous thing.
I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing too, because our readers have changed. I have a 12 and a 14-year-old, and I have a giant young adult section in my personal library that they're always allowed to take from. They're also allowed to read my non-young adult books, because I didn't have those separate categories.
Right.
But I try to read what they're reading so we can talk about it. Like when my son was in third grade, he read The Hunger Games, and many of his classmates were not allowed to read The Hunger Games because their parents were like, oh no, that's just not appropriate. We read it and had lengthy, in-depth discussions about the socioeconomic situation and how it, resulted in this particular society. And, when I was in third grade, that would not have happened, partly because my parents wouldn't have had that conversation and I would not have known what those things were. I might have read the book because it would have had the reading level, but I wouldn't have had someone to talk to about it. But I know that what he's reading is not what I was reading, partly because it wasn't available.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, the audience has changed and to meet what the audience wants to read.
Yeah, I think I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. I think from what I've seen is, I don't want to say that kids have changed, because kids are still kids. But I think with so many, well, honestly, I think the internet's changed a lot. I think they're exposed to so many, other points of view, realizing that there's other types of fiction or sci-fi or fantasy besides, the classics that we grew up with. So I think I think in a good way, there's an appetite for representation and using not the same old tropes. it's interesting their taste in books. My youngest still, he's 14, but he still kind of likes maybe what would be, middle grade, because that's just what he likes. Those are the stories he likes. Whereas my 16-year-old is actually starting to get into the Dresden Files series, which is definitely adults, but those plot points are what engages him, and so it's just, it's interesting. It feels like the scope is just so huge as to what kids want out there. So I think it's great. Curious if there are any questions from our audience or our guests out there. I see Mary has said that everyone I know who reads Tolkien started in the YA years. Her teen only reads gay YA, and there's a lot of that. Any comments on that?
Representation is great.
It is. It's a great thing to see. It's that is not only getting written, it's getting published, and it's finding its a very wide market. That's obviously one of the big massive strengths both of middle grade, each in its own way, and YA, is that we can open up subjects, and this when we are literally shaping conceptions of the future. Specifically, we're talking about science fiction. That's what it's all about, and fantasy just as well in a different way. So it's it's just an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, because going back to the Tolkien, I basically read it as a 13-year-old. Basically, my dad basically handed it to me, so I'm not accustomed to people reading it just as adults.
Yeah, the same with like The Hobbit.
Yeah, my parents didn't.
Go ahead.
My parents weren't big readers.
Oops, we lost her.
Uh-oh, we lost her.
Shoot.
I'm sure she'll hop it. Clint, if you see her, oh, there she is. Okay. We'll give her a second to reconnect.
Am I back?
You're the.
Yep.
We hear you, Shireen.
We hear you.
No picture yet. But...
excellent. My internet, my connection was unstable, and so I switched to my hotspot, and something didn't go right apparently. So hopefully that doesn't happen again, but if it does, I apologize. So my parents weren't big readers. They just let me read whatever I want. I found Tolkien because of the animated Hobbit, and I was reading the credits at some point based on a novel and I'm like, oh, I like novels. I shall read this. But we read the books to my kids. Both their names come from the appendices of The Lord of the Rings, or of Return of the King. So
oh, wow.
They've been inundated with this stuff forever.
Oh,
shoot.
Oh. She's making such good points. And then
I know. Really want to hear it.
Good, you're back.
We see you again, Shireen.
And I'm back. I don't know, maybe my son's downloading something, playing video games, hogging the Wi-Fi.
So we heard that your kids' names come from the appendix of Return of the King, and
and that's where I cut out? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they've been inundated with this since they were very little, and they would ask to listen to the audiobooks on road trips. And then they both got their own books of The Hobbit at some point. So yeah, it's on a tangent now.
I remember that animated version of The Hobbit. I totally remember that. And actually, I don't know if you all remember this, but there was, well, I'm dating myself now. I want to say it was in the 70s. There was an animated Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and that's what got me into
Loved it.
Chronicles of Narnia. Yeah.
Nice.
That's a deep dive right there. That I haven't remembered that in years. Wow. Anyways, so I want to kind of briefly talk about, and then I want to get your opinions on what I'm going to say, is the reason I named this panel that, middle grade YA audience, they're not just small adults. So I, as my full-time job, I work in the mental health field, specifically with children's mental health. And one of the things we constantly run into is that, everything from the way we offer treatment, to the medications even that are given to kids. None of this is tested for kids. It's all tested on adults.
Right.
And it's kind of like this mentality that, oh, well, kids are just small grown-ups, but they're not. Their body chemistries are different. Their brains are different. And so, you know, when I thought of that, I'm like, you know, I think that applies to the type of work and the type of writing that we do. And I'm just curious to what your thoughts are on that.
I'm sorry, just until 10.
Well, the way of thinking too, because the one thing I love about middle grade and YA, which is why I read a lot, is that there's a lot more hope. There's a lot more, they haven't been ground down by the cynicism of the adults to say, oh, no matter what you do, it's never going to fix anything. No, most of the YA I read, middle grade I read, it's like, yeah, the idea is, yeah, one person can make a difference. And speaking out actually will affect change. Even the YA I was reading way back when, the dim races of time, you still had that hope that you could do something to change and not just basically just, oh, well, there's nothing I can do, I'm not going to try anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, really interesting way of putting it there, Paul, because you're right that, you know, a lot of, just like me, a lot of middle grade authors are also adult authors, and you tend to just think, okay, well, you know, middle grade is specific, you study the specific, you know, genre, the specific expectations to middle grade, and then you just, you know, sort of apply that formula and then put your own sauce inside it to make it what you want it to be. And that's, I suppose that's like the absolute base zero level of adapting middle grade to the age, but I think we can do a lot better than that. You're probably right. And I know that it's weird because for middle grade, I feel that I want to, well, not treating them like little adults, but also not necessarily talking down to to children, to readers. You know, I mean, the middle grade manuscript that is with my agent currently, that we're building a book Bible for. Anyway, before we send it out, it's STEM based. So there's a lot of scientific concepts in there. There's a lot of representation. You know, there's a lot of, and it's kind of like how we've raised our own children. You know, trying to you know, not you know, not dilute things and talk to them openly about everything, while still obviously formatting it for children. So I suppose it's a very delicate balance, isn't it?
It is. It is.
I hope I'm not duplicating anything from when I was popping in and out because my internet connection, my hotspot was not working, so I've switched back. I have never been kicked out of Zoom so many times ever.
I'm sorry. You're fine.
But anyway, so I hope I'm not repeating anything. But one of the things that I like about writing YA is that kids and teens don't always expect to understand everything right away. They're used to not knowing how everything works because that's how life is for them. As adults, we're a lot less accepting of that understanding. And so I find it actually very freeing about writing young adult stuff because I don't have to explain everything in a way that's fully understandable. And you can give it to them slowly, even if by the end they're going to understand how the magic system works or how this culture works. You don't have to front load it as much because they're used to wading through a little bit of confusion as things get set up, whereas adults have very little patience for that. And if I can't tell in the first, you know, paragraph or first page what's going on, to some extent, I don't feel grounded, I'm done with this book. So that's actually a bonus of writing YA. And middle grade is that the expectations from the readers are different. You can cross genres in a way that you can't with adult fiction. Publishers get very cranky if you mix genres together, whereas young adult, it's allowed because the kids aren't like, well, you can't put fantasy in my mystery. Ew, gross. It's supposed to be just one or the other. And so you're allowed to have more of that mix up in there.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard, and you just made the point, Shireen, was, you know, when you start writing a book, you know, you got to have by the first or at the very latest, the second chapter, the readers have to know exactly what's going on, and you got to explain, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, that is not my experience with what younger audiences want. I think they like the mystery. They like putting the pieces
Mhm.
together. The ambiguity's okay, like you said, you know. Great. So, you know, what are some of the joys of writing for this audience, middle grade YA? What are some of the joys? What do you enjoy about it?
Revisiting the sense of wonder.
That,
Mhm.
yes, very much that. I used to write mostly adult fiction, and my writers group pointed out that my natural voice was kind of, they said it was sort of like Alice in the Through the Looking Glass, where I would, you know, take the normal and mundane and make it magical, and then I would take the, you know, things that we look at as horrifying and, you know, whatever, and make them drab and dull. And so I kind of flipped the expectations on those things, which worked really nicely for young adult because of that sense of wonder.
What are some of the joys that people have about it?
On a much smaller scale, circumventing the sort of no swear words thing is a very fun thing to do. Inventing specific lingo which won't qualify as swear words, but you know, fills
Yeah,
the
because I
role.
mean, my talking horses swear, but you have to figure out, well, what is their swear words?
I'm talking about middle grade, obviously. YA is a bit different, but yeah.
Awesome.
Well, and I find it fun to be able to connect with people who have read my stuff, who are younger and who feel like, you know, this is something that speaks for them. And I think that's kind of something that happens anywhere, but for me, it feels, there's more impact for me when it's a younger reader, because they're still deciding whether reading is something that they're going to pursue and continue to enjoy. And if I can produce something that they enjoy, I know that I'm, you know, helping lead them on to being a lifelong reader and enjoying, you know, the discovery and the magic of reading books and finding new worlds.
That's one of the most rewarding things for me, is meeting a young person that's read something I've written, and they come back and they tell me how much they enjoyed it. And I mean, yeah, it's a bit of an ego boost, but it's like what you said, that wow, you're reading and you're enjoying it, and please keep it up. Don't stop reading, you know, that sort of thing. And so that's a really great feeling to have, you know.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think it also helps, you know, writing young stuff helps me feel younger. It helps, you know, because I'm writing stuff for a contemporary audience of young adults, I need to stay in touch with what's interesting, what's cool, what do they care about. And it, you know, and this isn't even related to the actual publishing and putting out the books. This is the, you know, a side bonus of, you know, being immersed in this genre and needing to be connected. I feel, you know, younger, and I feel the sense of hope that, you know, this younger generation, you know, has some really awesome qualities. They care a lot about diversity. They care a lot about the environment, and they are not willing to sit down and shut up about things that they care about. You know, my son has participated at protests at school, you know, walkouts and all sorts of things. And it's like, this is really, really cool. So it's given me a look actually at what that generation looks like right now and what we can see hopefully from their future.
That's great. So on the flip side of that, what are some of the pitfalls, or the most common pitfalls, when writing for this audience?
Length.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you saying
It's
that
gotten
we're
better, and
Go ahead.
this is one of those things that, you know, we do get to thank J.K. Rowling, regardless of what other feelings we may have for her right now. And I admit my feelings are not great right now, but we can be thankful that because of the way her books were appreciated and read and sold, publishers are now seeing that, oh yeah, okay, we can publish longer YA books, longer middle grade books. I know Tamara Pierce was very grateful for this when she was writing one of her sets of books. She could make it a 2-book series rather than a quartet. And she really wanted it to be 2 books because that's how the plot worked. She's like, I don't have another plot to fit in here. How do I make that? And so that's actually a really nice thing, but it's writing the length that's necessary can be tough to fit in the story that you want to tell.
And sometimes you still run into those editors who think, oh, you can't use big words. You have to have really short paragraphs. Excuse me, no, I was reading Lord of the Rings at 13, come on.
And it depends on the audience, because there are multiple audiences within middle grade and young adult. I have a member of my writers group who she works in schools as an assistant, professional assistant for kids who are have learning disabilities or autism spectrum disorder is one of her specialties. And so she tends to work with kids who speak Spanish, have autism, and are behind on reading.
Oh gosh.
So
Wow.
she's writing a book right now that is designed to be high interest for the age, but the reading level is a little lower. So, you know, she's specifically writing for that audience. But a lot of times, you know, I'm not necessarily writing for that audience. Not that there shouldn't be people writing for that audience, because there should. We want books to be available and interesting for everybody. We don't want to just be giving these kids, you know, baby books, because that's not fun for them. But, you know, it really depends on the audience you're writing for. And you're not going to be able to write something that appeals to the, you know, all kids who are age 13. Because some are going to be able to read those much, much bigger words and find that fun. And some are going to find, you know, a sentence that lasts more than half the line of the page scary and bad. Yeah. So you can't appeal to all of them.
And maybe the flip side as well, or at least a corollary to what Kathy was saying, and also that's what everybody's saying, is that you know, it's not just, I think, in terms of word length and complexity and sort of lexile rating that that, you know, you need to be, or there's that risk of thinking you have to dumb it down, but also in terms of content, you know, in terms of the emotional range that you can cover, in terms of you know, the technical level. If you're talking about science fiction, you know, you can do middle grade hard science fiction, because hard doesn't mean you have to, you know, pull out schematics. It just means that, you know, it's a credible world and that you kind of explain things at the level. I think, this is my personal belief, and I'm a lawyer as well, and I find that, you know, children can understand the most complex or presented as complex issues, as long as you don't use silly jargon, which is only there to hide things, and you just explain it in normal words. And it works, because there's nothing that we can understand, really, if you take the time to explain it, that, you know, a 10-year-old at the end of the day can't understand, you know, at least to you know, a functional level. You know, so, you know, I think that we have a lot of work to do as middle grade authors in particular, and YA as well, you know, to find that middle ground and to find that balance with a high level of quality content, but also high level of adaptation, like you were saying, Paul, and to make sure that we don't treat them as, you know, just sort of watered down adults, or in terms of creations, not watered down adult books. They are a specific entity. Yep.
So we're almost at 10 minutes left. So I want to get right to audience questions, because there's a few. So Sean, hi Sean, saw you yesterday, good to see you again. Do most YA series stay within their own category, or do they age up with their readers, going from middle to young to new adult? And then second, what would we recommend? Would we recommend growing with the readers, or staying where you start to not throw readers off? Easy answer, right? One or two words.
I mean, we've seen with J.K. Rowling, with the Harry Potter books, it did age up with the readers.
Yeah.
Tamara Pierce in the Circle of Magic books did kind of age up, because the kids became old enough to get their own apprentices. But I've also read other series where the kids never seemed to age.
Yeah.
They just had more adventures.
Yeah.
But that was common for when I was growing up, but I'm still seeing it now with the current series.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or the mantle gets passed to, you know, the younger siblings or something.
Mhm.
You know.
Right.
Yeah, Tamara Pierce has done that with her Tortall books. You know, she
Mhm.
started out following Alana, then, you know, and she followed Alana into early adulthood, and then the next book picked up with another young adult character in the same world, where we got to, you know, see some of our old wonderful friends again. But it didn't, I wouldn't say that it aged up, because the books are stayed the same reading level.
Mhm.
And I think there are benefits and risks to both. Aging up is great if you have an audience who's reading it as you're publishing it, and you're able to publish it at a rate that ages with the readers. But then once those books are published, they're there, and people are going to come to them at different points. And, you know, they read the first book, and they're like, oh, I want to read the second book. And they could age up too fast for the reader, depending on what you've done with them.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis even did that with Narnia. Didn't when Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, they were done by the third book, and then he brought in new kids. So yeah. Let's see. Mary asks, what lengths do publishers, editors look for?
It varies.
It really does.
It does, yeah.
Because it used to be you'd have the same set length, but after Harry Potter book 5, you basically have to make sure to read the guidelines, because each one will say what they consider to be YA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're saying, Mary, that there might be some unwritten rules depending from publisher to publisher if you're going to go traditionally published. I think if you're independently published, there's a little bit more freedom and flexibility there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
DL Hill asks, what's the story for each of you as to how you first became published? Who wants to go first?
Go first.
Go ahead.
So I actually initially started publishing the traditional route. I was originally I was a novelist, and at the time, this was, you know, 25 years ago, you had to sell at least 3 short stories in order for an agent to be willing to look at you, and blah, blah, blah. So I worked on writing short stories and learned to write short stories, which had not been a natural form for me. So wrote bunches of short stories, sent them out, got lots of rejections, sold several. And then I had kids, and I had a whole lot less time to dedicate to writing, because I also had to work. And I decided that I was going to use my writing time how I wanted. Since no one was actually paying me to do it, I was going to just focus on novels. Because sending out, when you have lots of stories, which I write fast, so I have lots of stories, sending them out was a huge time commitment. So then at some point I was like, oh, I don't really want to play the publishing game, because I have some friends who signed contract, got books published, but then ended up being pushed into writing stuff that they didn't want to write, because that's what their publisher wanted them to do. And I'm like, none of them are making enough money to make it worth their while. I mean, yeah, if they're making lots of money, sure, sell your soul for that. That's great. But, you know, I'd rather be writing what I want to write, not what somebody tells me I need to write. I do that in my day job as a technical writer. So I decided to go indie at that point.
How about you, Kathy?
I'm the poster child for persistence. I started writing and sending out when I was 14, and sending out and getting rejects and sending out, and I was promoting the novels I'd written as a 14-year-old, but there was many revisions. I also started writing short stories kind of based in that world, because I really liked that world. And in my late 20s, finally got some of the short stories published, and then ebooks came along, and they were publishing some of my short stories and said, we're going to start doing a book publishing. Have you got anything longer? And that book I've been sending out a lot got published, won an award, knew it was good. And I've been going with the small press.
Nice. How about you, Jay?
Yeah, I'm currently a small press author as well. I'll try and make it as short as possible, because it is always very long, like, you know, decade spanning adventure. I mean, we talk about anything about publishing by definition, but I was really lucky in that the manuscript, which was a very big and quite messy manuscript, which I then managed to completely revise and turn to these two novels right here, which are the first two in my currently published series. I was lucky that even though I had quite a bit of agent interest, I was getting partials and even some fulls, but it was never quite clicking. There was a small press called Uproar Books, which was just a relatively new starting small press. They work out of Nashville, who really loved the premise, loved the idea, loved the voice, but said, this needs a lot of work. Here it is. They sent me a revise and resubmit, a detailed revise and resubmit letter, which I was very lucky to receive, because that then let me put the work in, put however many extra months work into the manuscript to get it into shape, and then send it. And that's what landed me my first book deal on Always Greener. And then using that, I was able to say, well, because I was comfortable working with the small press, could you give me a couple of weeks, let me take this deal to a few agents who had shown interest with a offer in hand query. And that all of a sudden the power dynamic shifted quite a bit with regards to the agents. There was a lot of interest, and I ended up signing with my current agent, who is Marisa Corvacero.
Great. So for me, I actually started posting long form serialized sci-fi fantasy on the net, and started getting a lot of good feedback. They said you should write something original, so that's where my series came from. So I am independently published. I did 4 crowdfunding projects to publish the books that I have out right now. So and from that, hiring an editor, copy editors, that sort of thing, cover designers. So I tried to, being independently published, I really wanted to make sure I put the work in to get like professionally edited and a great cover designer, that sort of thing. So yeah, that was my journey to where I am now. We have 3 minutes left. Chelsea, you got just questioning, or I'm sorry, comments about the aging up characters. I just see your comment there. So yeah, your conclusion is it's a fun idea, but your personal opinion is that it's best to avoid needing to age up that much. Great point. Really good point.
I would tend to agree.
Yep. Okay. So in our last 3 minutes, boy, which question do I want to do here? All right. So quick advice to anybody that wants to start writing in this genre. If you could give us like 1 minute advice between what would that be for someone who wants to start writing in this genre? Do you want to start, Kathy?
Read a lot, be persistent, keep sending things out. And it also helps to have a beta reader in that age group.
Yes.
Because they can say, oh, we don't use that expression anymore. My grandmother uses that expression.
Yeah. It's also very affirming to have your children read your stuff and love it when, they get to see how the soup is made behind the scenes. That's always very rewarding. Other than that, the exact same advice I'd give any writer of any genre at any age category. Keep working on the thing, finish the thing, start the next thing. Don't get hung up on the one you just finished and think this is the one, and if it's not this, then you'll never be a writer. You are a writer because you're putting words down in a word processor. And other than that, just keep writing the next thing after that, at whatever your rate is, but just keep going.
What's you, Shireen?
Read a lot, write a lot, and then if you can find people who can give you feedback, whether that's other writers or people who just enjoy reading it, who can be polite and civil, not I want to beat you up kind of feedback, because nobody needs that, especially when they're first starting, because we all suck when we start. When we start something and we're not good at it, and maybe some of us naturally have more talent than others when we start out, but find someone who's going to be supportive but help you improve, whether that's a workshop, a writer's group, whatever. There's lots of options for that. And then just keep at it, because it does take that persistence that Kathy was talking about.
Yep. And to piggyback on that, I would say, like what Kathy said, do your homework, find out what the audience likes, and spend some time with the audience. If you know people with YA middle grade kids, spend some time, talk to them, have conversations with them, find out what they like, and believe me, they will tell you what they like and what they don't like, and listen to them, you know. So yeah. All right, we are at 10:45. That went fast.
Really?
So for those of you still in the chat, I'm going to head over to the Discord server. There's a writers chat text group. I'm going to go hang out there for about 15 minutes. If anybody wants to go over and have more discussion, that's great. But thank you all for attending. Thank you, Kathy and Jay and Shireen. It was a lot of fun. I hope we gave the people listening some really good information, and enjoy the rest of RoberCon. All right,
Take
thank
care,
you.
folks. Pleasure meeting you all.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you too.